The metallic, copper-sharp tang of fresh blood was the first thing that sliced through the suffocating scent of frozen pine and wet stone. It pool-filtered down her chin, a single heavy drop that welled from her split lower lip before falling to crater the pristine, untouched snow beneath her boots. Evadne didn't wipe it away. Her knuckles were already raw, scraped to the bone where she had clawed her way up the jagged face of the obsidian crags, the rough, frost-bitten slate biting into her palms like shards of glass. Behind her, the rhythmic, thunderous thudding of paws tore through the winter silence, heavy, predatory, and relentless. The blood trackers of the Iron Grip pack were gaining ground. Their breath came in ragged, synchronized gusts, a foul mixture of rotting meat and rancid grease that contaminated the crisp, biting mountain air. She exhaled, her breath forming a thick, trembling cloud of white mist that vanished into the looming twilight. Her lungs burned as if she were inhaling shards of crushed diamonds. Evadne's internal wolf was utterly silent, coiled in the deepest, darkest recess of her soul like a dying ember. For 3 long years, her wolf had been suppressed, bound by heavy, invisible chains of ancient magic that choked out her inner beast, leaving her appearing as nothing more than a fragile, powerless human omega to the cruel world around her. They thought she was weak. They thought she was a spy, a treacherous rat planted in the heart of the Winter Citadel by the court's elite. The malicious whispers of Lady Lyra, the king's former favorite, had woven a web of flawless lies, framing Evadne for a treason she had never committed. The punishment for such a crime under the law of the Beast King was public execution, her throat ripped open before the entire pack to feed the ancestral grounds. But Evadne possessed a steel spine. Even now, with her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird and her muscles screaming in agony, she refused to cower. She would not die kneeling in the dirt, begging for a mercy that did not exist in these brutal lands. She reached the edge of the plateau. The ground simply ceased to be. Below her stretched the jaws of the screaming chasm, a terrifying drop of hundreds of feet where the black, violent waters of the Glacial Serpent River roared through the canyon. The water was a churning vortex of liquid ice, white-capped waves smashing violently against razor-sharp boulders of frost-shattered granite. The spray rose in a freezing shroud, instantly coat-painting her eyelashes with delicate crystals of frost. The sheer kinetic energy of the river vibrated through the soles of her worn leather boots, a low, ominous rumble that promised swift, merciless death to anyone foolish enough to test its depths. "Stop right there, little rat," a grating voice boomed from the tree line. Commander Varro stepped into the open, his massive, hulking frame shifting halfway between man and wolf. His jaw was distended, lined with rows of yellowed, dripping fangs, and his skin was covered in coarse, bristle-like gray fur. Behind him, 4 more trackers emerged, their eyes glowing a predatory crimson, their chest muscles heaving. They fanned out in a semicircle, cutting off her only avenue of escape. They smelled of stale sweat, damp fur, and the sickening anticipation of violence. "You have nowhere left to run, Evadne," Varro sneered, his low-frequency growl vibrating the dead leaves on the ground. He took a heavy, deliberate step forward, his claws extended, scraping against the frozen shale with a sound that set her teeth on edge. "The king demands your head. Yield now, and perhaps I will make the tearing of your throat quick. Continue this foolishness, and my men will enjoy breaking you piece by piece before we drag your carcass back to the citadel." Evadne did not flinch. She stood perfectly still on the absolute brink of the precipice, the freezing wind whipping her tangled dark hair across her pale face. Her eyes, a striking, unnerving shade of liquid silver, locked onto the commander with an absolute, terrifying calm. "You may tell the king," Evadne said, her voice impossibly quiet, yet carrying a resonant, unyielding strength that cut through the roaring of the river below. That I do not bow to tyrants, and I do not die for lies. Before Varos could respond, the atmosphere changed. The air grew suffocatingly dense, heavy with the sudden, overwhelming scent of a looming thunderstorm. The sharp, electric ozone mixed with the intoxicating, rich aroma of molten gold and ancient, charred cedarwood. The sheer pressure of the air dropped so rapidly that the trackers instantly fell to their knees, whimpering as the crushing weight of an absolute alpha dominance washed over the clearing. The snow itself seemed to melt away from the sheer, radiating heat of the entity approaching from the darkness of the forest. King Valerius, the Beast King. He strode out from the shadows, not as a wolf, but in his towering, magnificent human form, though the raw, untamed beast within him was practically bursting through his skin. He wore a heavy, fur-lined royal cloak of midnight black, trailing behind him over the blood-stained snow. His chest was broad, a fortress of muscle scarred by 100 battles, his skin the color of sun-warmed marble. His jaw was set in a hard, uncompromising line, and his eyes, holy gods, his eyes, were a burning, incandescent amber that pierced through the gloom like twin suns. He was the apex predator of the northern realms, a god among monsters. "Stand down," Valerius commanded. His voice was a profound, seismic rumble that shook the very foundation of the cliffside. It wasn't a shout, it was a physical force that demanded absolute, unconditional submission. The trackers prostrated themselves completely, their faces pressed into the freezing dirt. Valerius's burning amber gaze swept over the clearing until it landed directly on Evadne. And then, the universe shattered. It happened in the span of a single heartbeat, a cataclysmic explosion that ripped through the fabric of their very souls. The mate bond. It didn't just snap into place, it erupted like a dormant volcano, a raging, white-hot furnace that tore down every mental wall, every defensive barrier they had ever built. A violent physical shockwave of golden energy seemed to pass between them, an invisible wire of pure, unadulterated electricity that connected her heart directly to his. Evadne gasped, her hand flying to her chest as the sudden, overwhelming warmth flooded her veins, temporarily melting the icy armor around her heart. Her suppressed wolf stirred, letting out a faint, desperate whine of recognition that echoed in the back of her mind. Mate. True mate. Valerius stumbled back a half-step, his massive chest heaving as his eyes widened in absolute, unmitigated horror. The arrogant, ruthless expression of the king vanished, replaced by a raw, naked shock that made him look human for a fraction of a second. The realization struck him like a physical blow to the sternum. The girl he had hunted, the girl he had condemned to death as a traitor, was the other half of his soul. The divine, ancient laws of the moon goddess had woven their threads together, and he had spent the last week trying to destroy her. "No," Valerius whispered, the low frequency of his voice cracking with a sudden, desperate panic that he had never experienced in his entire immortal life. He smelled her now, not the scent of a spy, but the intoxicating, ethereal fragrance of crushed winter lilies, frost-kissed silver, and an undercurrent of something ancient, pure, and devastatingly powerful that had been hidden from him. "You." He took a desperate, lunging step toward her, his hand reaching out, his long, scarred fingers trembling slightly as he tried to bridge the distance between them. "Evadne, step away from the edge. Now. That is an order." But Evadne looked at him, and the silver in her eyes hardened into polished, impenetrable steel. She felt the bond. She felt the agonizing, beautiful pull that commanded her to run into his arms, to submit to his strength, to seek protection in his massive chest. But she also remembered the cell. She remembered the cold iron chains, the mocking laughter of Lyra, and the absolute silence of this king when she had begged for a fair trial. He had believed the lies. He had hunted her like an animal. "You are too late, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice a chillingly calm contrast to the roaring chaos of the wind and water. "Evadne, don't you dare!" Valerius roared, his wolf bursting to the surface, his amber eyes flaring with a terrifying protective madness. He leaped forward with supernatural, preternatural speed, a blur of muscle and black fur, his hand outstretched to grasp her waist, to pull her back from the abyss. But she was already moving. With a final, defiant look locked into his burning amber eyes, Evadne took a deliberate step backward. She let herself fall. The wind caught her clothes, tearing at her hair as she tipped over the edge of the towering cliff. For a single, suspended second, she felt weightless, suspended in the gray twilight sky like a falling star. Above her, she saw the silhouette of the king reach the edge, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated agony and rage that rent the heavens. Valerius didn't hesitate. He didn't think of his kingdom, his crown, or his laws. With a guttural, earth-shattering roar of sheer terror, he ripped off his heavy royal cloak, casting it to the wind, and dove headfirst into the freezing abyss after her. The descent was a blur of rushing air and terrifying speed. The freezing temperature hit Evadne like a physical wall, stealing the remaining breath from her lungs before she even impacted the water. The roaring of the Glacial Serpent River swallowed her whole. Thump. The impact with the water was like hitting a sheet of solid concrete. The liquid ice slammed into her body, bruising her flesh and instantly numbing her senses. Darkness, absolute and crushing, closed over her head. The current was a monstrous living beast, grabbing her limp form and dragging her down into the black, swirling depths. The water was so cold, it felt like liquid fire, burning her skin, filling her mouth with the bitter mineral taste of mountain runoff. Her consciousness began to fray at the edges. She couldn't breathe. Her limbs felt like lead weights, pulling her deeper into the watery grave. Her suppressed wolf flickered, a tiny spark of silver light deep within her soul, crying out for survival. But the physical cold was too absolute. She was slipping away, sinking into the peaceful, silent dark. Through the murky, turbulent water, a sudden flash of brilliant golden amber light pierced the darkness. A massive, powerful shadow cut through the violent current with impossible strength. Valerius. He was swimming downward, his powerful arms throwing aside the deadly currents as if they were nothing, his face twisted in a desperate, frantic determination. He was fighting the river itself for her. Before she could lose consciousness completely, his massive, scarred hands locked around her waist. His grip was a vice, territorial, possessive, and unyielding. He pulled her fragile, shivering body tightly against his broad, muscular chest, enveloping her in his radiating, unnatural warmth. Even in the depths of the freezing river, the touch of their bare skin ignited a brilliant, magical explosion of golden sparks that swirled around them like underwater stars, illuminating the dark winter canyon rocks beneath the surface. Valerius kicked hard against the current, his amber eyes glowing with an ancient primal fury as he forced their way back toward the surface, refusing to let the river claim what was his. The violent transition from the suffocating watery dark to the biting night air came in a chaotic explosion of sound and motion. Valerius broke the surface of the Glacial Serpent River with a guttural, primal roar, his massive chest heaving as he fought the relentless surging current with brute, supernatural strength. One of his colossal, scarred arms was wrapped around Evadne's waist like an iron band, locking her shivering, frail form against his chest, while his free arm battered against the white-capped waves. The water around them was a churning vortex of liquid ice, throwing them violently against the submerged, jagged boulders of the canyon. Evadne choked, her steel spine momentarily shattering as she convulsed, coughing up the freezing, mineral-heavy water that had filled her lungs. Her silver eyes flew open, dilated and wild with survival panic, but her vision was a blurred, dark smear of towering winter cliffs and monochromatic moonlight. The sheer, paralyzing cold had completely locked her joints. She couldn't fight him. She could barely breathe. Every inhalation felt as though she were swallowing liquid needles, her body shaking so violently that her teeth clicked together in a frantic, erratic rhythm. "I have you," Valerius growled, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that cut through the roaring cascade of the river. It wasn't the voice of the composed Alpha King who sat upon the obsidian throne of the Winter Citadel. It was the raw, panicked sound of a beast that had almost watched its entire world burn. "Hold on to me, damn you! Do not let go!" He didn't wait for her compliance. With a powerful, coordinated surge of his massive thighs, he propelled them through the crushing rapids toward a narrow, boulder-strewn bank beneath the shadow of a weeping willow tree, its frozen branches hanging down like shards of glass. His boots found the slippery, moss-covered slate of the riverbed, and he lunged out of the water, carrying her weight as if she were nothing more than a handful of down feathers. The moment his feet hit the dry, frost-bitten earth, Valerius collapsed onto his knees, bringing her down with him into the shallow snow. He was trembling, not from the sub-zero temperature of the water, but from the residual, terrifying aftershock of the mate bond. The rich, intoxicating scent of molten gold, burnt cedar, and electric ozone radiated off his soaking wet skin, intensified by the sheer heat his alpha body was producing to combat the hypothermia. Evadne lay sprawled across his lap, her face pale as porcelain, her lips a faint, bruised shade of slate blue. The wet, dark strands of her hair clung to her cheeks and throat like skeletal fingers. Yet, even as her body shivered uncontrollably, the silver in her eyes flared back to life as she looked up at him. The initial shock of the water was passing, and the unyielding, stubborn pride that defined her essence returned with a vengeance. She placed her raw, scraped hands against the heavy muscle of his chest, trying to push herself away from his suffocating warmth. "Touch me, and I will tear your throat out myself," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, yet completely devoid of fear. The absolute iron certainty in her tone made the words sound like a vow rather than a threat. Valerius's amber eyes flared, a brilliant, incandescent gold that illuminated the darkness between them. His jaw tightened so hard the muscles jumped beneath his sun-warmed marble skin. He didn't release her. Instead, his grip tightened, his long, calloused fingers digging into the damp fabric of her tunic, pinning her against him. "You speak of killing me," Valerius rumbled, his low-frequency voice vibrating directly against her chest. "While your body is shutting down from the frost. Look at me, Evadne. Look at what you did." He leaned down, his face inches from hers, his hot breath forming thick, ragged clouds of steam between them. "You jumped. You looked into my eyes, felt the bond, and you chose the abyss over me." "I chose freedom," she spat back, coughing slightly as the cold air irritated her raw throat. The sharp, copper taste of the blood from her split lip mingled with the icy moisture on her skin. "I chose the river over a court of executioners. I chose death over becoming your prisoner again." "You are not my prisoner," the king roared, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like a thunderclap. The trackers back on the cliffside would have died of fright hearing that tone, but Evadne didn't even blink. "You are my mate. The moon goddess herself chose you for me. Do you think I would let them touch a single hair on your head now? Do you think I would let Lyra's venom dictate the fate of my soul?" The mention of Lady Lyra made Evadne's gaze narrow. A cold, cynical smile touched her lips. "You believed her before. You sent your blood trackers after me. You hunted me like a rabid dog through the obsidian crags, Valerius. Do not play the protective mate now, just because the magic in your blood forced your eyes open." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Valerius flinched, his massive chest heaving as the sickening weight of guilt settled deep into his gut. She was right. He had allowed the politics of his court, the carefully constructed evidence of espionage, to blind him. He had signed the warrant for her arrest. If she hadn't fled, if she hadn't possessed the terrifying, suicidal bravery to leap from that cliff, he might have broken her before ever discovering the truth. The thought made his inner wolf roar in agony, clawing at his insides, demanding that he submit to her, that he beg for her forgiveness. But he was still the king, and the instinct to protect, to dominate and control the space around his mate to ensure her survival, was too overwhelming. "The past week was a mistake," he said, his voice dropping into a rough, gravelly frequency that practically demanded her compliance. "A mistake I will rectify with the blood of anyone who played a part in framing you. But right now, you are freezing. Your internal temperature is dropping, and your wolf, why isn't your wolf healing you? Why is your inner beast completely silent?" His amber eyes scanned her face, searching for the vibrant, spiritual aura that every werewolf possessed. But from Evadne, there was only a profound, unnatural emptiness. He could smell her unique scent, the winter lilies and silver, but the vibrant resonance of a pack wolf was missing. It was as if her soul were buried beneath a mountain of black ice. Evadne stayed silent, her jaw locked. She would never tell him about the ancient, binding chains that suppressed her wolf. She would never reveal the lineage of the Purifiers that ran through her veins, a bloodline thought to be extinct, capable of cleansing the dark corruption of the world, but targeted for total annihilation by those who feared its power. If Valerius knew what she truly was, she would never be free. She would become the ultimate prize, a weapon for his kingdom. "Answer me," Valerius commanded, his hand moving up to cup her jaw. His thumb, rough and covered in old battle calluses, brushed against her wet skin, tracing the line of her jaw with a strange, fierce tenderness. The contact was electric. A sudden, violent surge of golden sparks flickered across their skin where he touched her, the mate bond roaring in protest against her emotional withdrawal. Evadne flinched from the intensity of the sensation, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. The physical pull was an addiction, a sweet, agonizing poison that threatened to dissolve her steel spine. She wanted to lean into his large, warm hand. She wanted to let him carry her away from the cold, to wrap her in his midnight cloak and shield her from the world. But the memory of his cold, indifferent eyes back at the citadel burned brighter than the bond. "My wolf is none of your concern, Your Majesty," she said, her voice quiet, steady, and utterly freezing. "You have your mate, congratulations. But you do not have my loyalty, and you will never have my submission." Valerius stared down at her, his amber eyes darkening until they looked like pools of molten bronze. A dangerous, possessive light ignited within them. He rose to his feet, effortlessly lifting her into his arms and cradling her against his massive chest. "We will see about that, my fierce little rat," he whispered, his low growl sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "You think you can fight the bond? You think you can keep your secrets from me while sleeping in my bed? I am the Beast King, Evadne. I have torn down empires for less than what you are withholding from me. I will find out what you are hiding, and I will make you mine, completely, even if I have to burn the rest of the world to do it." He turned away from the river, carrying her into the deep, dark shadows of the winter forest, leaving behind the roaring waters of the abyss, but stepping directly into a psychological war where neither of them was prepared to surrender. The shadows of the deep winter forest closed around them like the heavy, black velvet of a funeral shroud, isolating them from the roaring fury of the Glacial Serpent River. The air here was different, thick with the oppressive scent of rotting pine needles, damp earth, and the metallic sting of frost. Valerius moved through the dense undergrowth with a silent, terrifying grace, his massive boots crushing the frozen twigs beneath his feet without a single sound. He held Evadne against his chest with a terrifying, absolute possessiveness, his body radiating a fierce, unnatural heat that felt like a furnace against her shivering, frozen skin. Evadne kept her eyes closed, her face pressed against the rough, scarred skin of his collarbone, though her mind remained sharply, dangerously awake. Her steel spine refused to break. She could feel the erratic, thunderous beating of his heart against her cheek, a frantic, heavy rhythm that betrayed the absolute chaos raging beneath his calm, alpha exterior. The mate bond was a living, breathing entity between them now, a heavy, golden chain that throbbed with every pulse of their blood, demanding that she yield, that she open her soul to him and let him heal her. But she couldn't. Deep within her chest, beneath the layers of frost and trauma, her secret lay hidden like a loaded weapon. If Valerius discovered the truth, not just about her suppressed wolf, but about the ancient bloodline of the Purifiers that ran through her veins, she would never know freedom again. Worse, he would find out about the child, the secret, frail little life she had hidden away in a secluded cabin on the very fringes of the northern wastes, protected by a fading cloaking spell. A child born of her sacred, forbidden lineage, a child whose very existence would throw the entire werewolf hierarchy into an apocalyptic war. She had escaped the winter citadel not just to save her own neck, but to ensure that the king's ruthless hounds would never sniff out the scent of her hidden sanctuary. You are thinking too loudly. Valerius's low-frequency rumble vibrated through his chest, the sound dark, gravelly, and laced with an undercurrent of intense frustration. He didn't look down at her, his amber eyes fixed on the dark path ahead, but his long, calloused fingers tightened their grip around her waist, pinning her closer. Your mind is a maze of walls, Evadne. I can feel them through the bond. Heavy, thick stone barriers. What are you guarding so fiercely? My privacy, Your Majesty, she replied, her voice a quiet, ice-cold whisper that didn't tremble despite the violent shivering of her limbs. She forced her eyes open, locking her silver gaze onto the hard, uncompromising line of his jaw. Something you and your pack have never respected. Valerius stopped abruptly. The air around them instantly grew dense, the overwhelming scent of electric ozone and molten gold flaring so violently it made her dizzy. He lowered her slowly, his movements deliberate and heavy, until her boots touched the frozen ground. But he didn't let her go. He backed her against the massive, rough trunk of an ancient oak tree, his towering frame completely eclipsing the moonlight, trapping her between his body and the solid wood. The contrast between them was devastating. He was a god of war and muscle, his skin dark and burning with alpha vitality. She was pale as a ghost, her dark hair dripping wet, her lips bruised, but her silver eyes burning with a defiance that no king could tame. "Do not test my patience tonight," Valerius growled, his voice dropping to a frequency so low it vibrated the dead leaves at their feet. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, his hot breath washing over her frozen lips. "I just dragged you out of the jaws of death. My wolf is raw, tearing at my insides because he can feel how close you are to breaking. You are freezing, your scent is fading, and yet you stand there, looking at me with nothing but poison in your eyes." "You want me to smile, Valerius?" Evadne let out a short, cynical laugh that turned into a ragged cough, the copper taste of blood returning to her tongue. "You want me to thank the man who allowed his court to brand me a traitor? You signed the execution order. If I hadn't jumped into that river, Your executioner would be scraping my spine right now."
"I did not know!"
Valerius roared, his fist slamming into the tree trunk right beside her ear, the force of the blow fracturing the thick bark and sending a shower of wood splinters into the snow. His amber eyes flared with a terrifying, incandescent madness. "The evidence against you was flawless, Evadne. Documents with your signature, witnesses from the border packs swearing you sold our defense plans to the Southern rebels. I am the king. I have an entire realm to protect. I could not let my personal feelings—" "Your personal feelings?" she interrupted, her quiet voice cutting through his rage like a silver blade. "You had no feelings for me before tonight. To you, I was just a quiet, useless human omega working in the kitchens. A nobody. You didn't care until the magic in your blood forced you to." Valerius flinched, his massive chest heaving as her words tore through his arrogance, exposing the bleeding, raw guilt underneath. He couldn't deny it. Before the bond snapped into place on that cliffside, he had viewed her as an insignificant pawn, a fragile creature caught in the crossfire of political treason. The sheer weight of his own failure as a ruler, and as a mate, was suffocating him. "Then let me fix it," he whispered, his tone suddenly shifting from dominant fury to a rough, desperate plea that shocked her to her very core. His large, scarred hand came up, his thumb gently tracing the split on her lower lip, his touch so hot it felt like a brand. "Let me take you to the hidden hunting lodge nearby. Let me warm you, feed you, and keep you safe while my executioners find Lyra and extract the truth from her veins. I will give you her head on a silver platter, Evadne. Just let me in. Stop fighting the bond." As his thumb brushed her skin, a sudden, violent surge of golden energy erupted between them. The mate bond roared to life, sending a wave of absolute addictive ecstasy crashing through her nervous system. It was a physical temptation so pure, so overwhelming, that her steel spine wavered for a fraction of a second. Her body wanted to lean into him, to surrender to the safety of his arms, to let his massive, warm frame shield her from the cruel winter. But then, deep within her soul, a sharp, cold alarm went off. The ancient magic binding her inner wolf suddenly throbbed, a warning vibration that rippled through her veins. With her heightened senses tuned to the bond, she felt a sudden, terrifying shift in the air. The scent of frozen pine and ozone was suddenly pierced by a foul, rotting stench, the unmistakable odor of sulfur and damp, matted fur. They weren't alone. "Valerius," she breathed, her voice losing its icy mask, replaced by a sudden, sharp urgency. Before the king could react, the darkness of the tree line exploded. 3 massive, monstrous shapes burst into the clearing, their fur black as pitch, their eyes glowing a sickening, demonic yellow. These weren't the king's blood trackers. These were the rogue slayers of the Shadowfangs, mercenaries hired by Lyra to ensure that Evadne never made it back to the Citadel alive to tell her story. The lead rogue, a hulking beast with a jagged scar ripping across its snout, lunged directly for Evadne's throat, its jaws snapping open to reveal rows of black, venomous teeth. The world slowed to a crawl of brutal, high-definition violence. The lead rogue's jaws snapped shut inches from Evadne's face, the foul, sulphurous stench of its breath washing over her skin like a wave of rotting meat. Before the beast's fangs could graze her flesh, Valerius moved. He didn't just strike, he erupted. With a guttural, earth-shaking roar that tore the remaining frost from the branches above, the king caught the massive rogue mid-air by its throat. The muscles in his broad back bunched and flexed, his veins bulging like thick ropes beneath his sun-warmed marble skin. With a sickening, resonant crack, he snapped the beast's neck with a single, effortless twist of his bare hands. He didn't even look at the carcass as he hurled it aside into the snow like a piece of garbage, his glowing amber eyes already locked onto the remaining 2 attackers.
Stay behind me,
Valerius commanded, his low-frequency voice vibrating with an absolute terrifying dominance that made the very ground beneath Evadne's boots tremble. The remaining 2 rogues hesitated, their yellow eyes widening with a primal, instinctual terror as they realized they weren't facing an easy target, but the apex predator of the northern realms. But the bloodlust and the dark magic driving them was too strong. They lunged simultaneously from left and right, their long black claws tearing through the air, aiming to flank the king. Valerius didn't even shift into his wolf. To him, these mercenaries were nothing more than insects. He stepped forward to meet them, his movements a blur of lethal, calculated perfection. He dodged the first rogue's swipe with an impossible, fluid grace, his calloused fist driving deep into the beast's ribcage. The sound of fracturing bone echoed through the silent clearing. As the second rogue closed in on his blind spot, Valerius spun, his legs sweeping out like a battering ram, slamming into the creature's skull and sending it flying into a jagged boulder of frost-shattered slate. Blood, thick and dark as melted tar, sprayed across the white snow. Evadne stood perfectly still against the ancient oak tree, her steel spine holding her upright despite the violent, uncontrollable shivering of her limbs. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. Her silver eyes watched the slaughter with a cold, calculating detachment, analyzing every move, every opening. But as she watched Valerius tear through the assassins, a sudden, agonizing spasm ripped through her own core. Deep within her soul, the ancient, binding chains holding her wolf captive suddenly throbbed with a burning, white-hot intensity. The proximity of such raw, unbridled violence, combined with the crushing pressure of the mate bond, was forcing her hidden power to the surface. It was the Purifier lineage, the forbidden, celestial bloodline that could cleanse any corruption. The energy began to leak out, a faint, ethereal silver glow pulsing faintly beneath the skin of her wrists, melting the frost on her sleeves. No, not now, she thought desperately, locking her jaw so hard her teeth ached. He cannot see this. He cannot know. With a brutal, final strike, Valerius crushed the last rogue's windpipe, standing victorious in the center of the crimson-stained clearing. He was breathing heavily, thick plumes of white steam rising from his broad, bare chest. The scent of molten gold and electric ozone was now suffocatingly thick, mixed with the copper tang of fresh enemy blood that dripped from his knuckles. He turned back to her, his amber eyes still wild with the residual madness of the battle. But as his gaze landed on her shivering form, the ferocity in his face instantly crumbled into an expression of raw, panicked concern. He was at her side in a heartbeat, his massive, blood-stained hands framing her pale face, his touch burning hot against her ice-cold skin. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" he demanded, his voice gravelly, desperate, and laced with a terrifying tenderness. His thumb brushed against her split lip, checking for new wounds. The moment his skin contacted hers, the mate bond exploded again, a violent golden current of electricity that forced a soft gasp from her lips. The faint silver glow on her wrists vanished instantly, suppressed by her sheer force of will. But the physical shock left her completely breathless. She was slipping. The hypothermia, the emotional exhaustion, and the sheer, overwhelming power of the king's presence were finally taking their toll on her physical body. "I am fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yet her silver eyes still held that stubborn, unyielding defiance. "They were Lyra's men. She wants me dead, so the truth dies with me." "She will fail," Valerius growled, his amber eyes darkening with a promise of total annihilation. "And she will suffer 1,000 deaths for what she has done to you." Without another word, he bent down and scooped her up into his arms again, holding her tightly against his chest. He didn't ask for her permission this time. He knew her body was at its absolute limit. He kicked through the blood-soaked snow, carrying her deeper into the hidden pathways of the forest, heading toward the sanctuary of his private hunting lodge. Evadne didn't fight him. She didn't have the strength left to push his massive chest away. As the darkness of the forest swallowed them, she let her head fall against his shoulder, her senses filled with his intoxicating, possessive scent. She was entering the lion's den, voluntarily letting her captor carry her away. But as her consciousness began to fade into a deep, icy slumber, one terrifying thought remained locked in her mind. The lodge is close to the northern wastes, close to the cabin, close to my child. If he discovers the secret, I will have to kill the king. The heavy, ancient oak door of the hidden hunting lodge slammed shut behind them, cutting off the howling winter wind and the oppressive silence of the forest. The interior was a cavernous sanctuary of dark, hand-hewn logs and rough-cut stone, smelling deeply of aged cedarwood, dried lavender, and the cold mineral tang of the mountain. Valerius didn't waste a single heartbeat. He strode across the floor, his massive boots echoing heavily against the slate tiles, and deposited Evadne onto a wide, fur-lined hearth before a colossal stone fireplace. With a flick of his wrist, a burst of his raw alpha heat ignited the dry pine logs in the hearth. The flames roared to life instantly, casting a dancing, amber glow across the room, illuminating the deep shadows and painting the sun-warmed marble of his scarred chest with gold. Evadne collapsed into the thick furs, her body curling inward as the sudden warmth hit her frozen skin like a wave of physical pain. She was trembling so violently that her knuckles turned white where she clutched the pelts. Her damp tunic clung to her frame, the freezing river water slowly evaporating into columns of faint steam. Despite her exhaustion, her steel spine remained intact. She forced her chin up, her silver eyes tracking the king's every movement with the hyper-vigilance of a cornered predator. Valerius dropped to his knees before her, his towering frame completely blocking out the rest of the room. He smelled faintly of the rogue blood he had spilled, mixed with his own intoxicating scent of molten gold and electric ozone. His burning amber eyes scanned her face, his jaw set so tight the muscles jumped beneath his skin. "Take off the wet clothes," he commanded. His voice was a low, seismic frequency, thick with an absolute authority that brooked no argument. "You are losing core heat, Evadne. If you stay in those damp rags, the frost will take your lungs." "No," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, raspy from the river water, but absolutely unyielding. She dug her fingers deeper into the furs, pulling them tighter around her shoulders like armor. "I do not undress before my executioner." A dangerous primal spark ignited in Valerius's eyes. He took a heavy, deliberate step closer, his massive hands reaching out to grasp the hem of her wet tunic. "I am not your executioner, Evadne. I am your mate. And right now, my wolf is clawing at my ribs to rip these clothes off you myself to keep you from freezing to death. Do not fight me on this." "I will fight you on everything," she spat back, her silver eyes flaring with a brilliant, defiant light. As his fingers brushed against the damp fabric of her sleeve, the mate bond snapped between them like a taut wire. A violent, physical shockwave of golden energy erupted from the point of contact, sending a wave of white-hot, addictive heat straight to her core. Evadne gasped, her head falling back against the stone hearth as her defensive walls violently shuddered. It was an agonizingly beautiful sensation, a divine poison that demanded she surrender, that she let him take care of her, that she open the heavy stone gates of her soul. But as the golden light of the bond flared, it collided with something else deep within her. The physical intensity of the bond, combined with the extreme trauma of her hypothermia, cracked the invisible, ancient chains holding her wolf captive. Deep inside her soul, a blinding silver light began to leak through the fractures. The Purifier lineage, the ancient celestial power she had suppressed for years, awoke with a vengeance. Suddenly, the air in the cabin grew deathly still. The scent of molten gold and ozone was entirely overwhelmed by the ethereal, intoxicating fragrance of pure, frost-kissed silver and ancient winter lilies. Valerius froze, his hand staying still on her sleeve. His amber eyes widened in absolute, unmitigated shock as he watched the transformation happening right before him. The faint silver glow wasn't just a trick of the firelight. It was pulsing visibly beneath her porcelain skin, tracing the intricate, sacred veins of her forearms like liquid starlight. The raw, divine purity radiating off her was so intense that his own dominant alpha wolf instantly lowered its head in his mind, whimpering in a strange, instinctive reverence. What is this?" Valerius breathed, his rough, gravelly voice cracking with a sudden, profound awe. He looked from her glowing wrists to her silver eyes, which were now entirely luminous, devoid of pupils, burning like twin stars. "You are no human Omega. That scent, that power, it is ancient. It is holy." Evadne bit her lower lip so hard the copper taste of fresh blood burst across her tongue, using the physical pain to claw back control over her magic. She forced the silver light down, dragging it back into the dark recesses of her soul, reinforcing the cracking chains with every ounce of her remaining willpower. The glow faded slowly, leaving her gasping, her chest heaving as she slumped back into the furs, utterly spent. "It is nothing," she lied, her voice a hollow, exhausted whisper. "Do not lie to me," Valerius roared, his hands gripping her shoulders, pulling her up so she had to look into his burning face. The guilt and confusion in his eyes were agonizing to behold. "You are a Purifier, the lost bloodline of the Moonborn, the ones who can cleanse the dark rot, the ones my ancestors swore an oath to protect at all costs." He shook her gently, his calloused thumbs digging into her skin. "Why did you hide this? If you had shown this power at the court, Lyra's lies would have fallen to ash instantly. No one would dare accuse a Purifier of treason." "Because your court is a nest of vipers, Valerius," she screamed back, her quiet mask finally shattering as her steel spine turned into pure, raging fire. "If your elites knew what I was, I would not be a citizen. I would be a weapon, a breeding prize to strengthen your bloodlines. You would have locked me in a golden cage and drained my magic to secure your borders." She pushed against his massive chest with all her might, her small hands catching the rough edges of his old battle scars. "And it isn't just me you would have caged." The words slipped out before she could stop them, a fatal error born of raw, bleeding exhaustion. Valerius went perfectly still, his breath catching in his throat. His amber eyes narrowed, his predatory instincts instantly latching onto the subtle, terrified shift in her scent. The fragrance of winter lilies had suddenly turned sharp, with a distinct undercurrent of maternal panic. "What do you mean, not just you?" he asked, his voice dropping into a dangerously quiet, low-frequency register that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. He leaned in closer, his nose brushing against the hollow of her throat, inhaling deeply, searching her scent profile for the missing pieces of the puzzle. And then he found it. Buried deep beneath the scent of the river water, the frost, and her newly revealed magic, there was a faint, distinct, and heartbreakingly familiar aroma. The scent of a newborn. A sweet, milky fragrance, mixed with the unmistakable, genetic signature of his own bloodline. Valerius staggered back a step, dropping his hands from her shoulders as if he had been burned by molten iron. His face went completely pale, his eyes wide with a terrifying, wild realization that shook his entire world to its foundation. "A child," he whispered, his voice trembling with a raw, primal shock that she had never heard from the fierce Beast King. You have a child. My child." The silence that followed his words was absolute, heavy and suffocating, punctuated only by the aggressive snapping of the pine logs in the hearth. The ambient heat radiating from the fireplace felt suddenly oppressive, baking the scent of wet fur, charred cedar, and the sweet, milky fragrance of a hidden life into the very fabric of the room. Valerius remained frozen on his knees, his colossal form casting a monstrous, trembling shadow across the stone wall behind him. His eyes, usually two pools of burning, unyielding amber, were wide, dilated, and fractured with a vulnerability that looked entirely alien on the face of the realm's most ruthless sovereign. Evadne's heart slammed against her ribs like a dying bird, but the steel spine that had carried her through the frozen crags did not fail her now. She pulled the thick fur pelts tighter around her body, her raw, scraped knuckles digging into the leather backing until her hands shook from the strain. Her silver eyes, no longer glowing but still cold and sharp as polished daggers, locked onto his face. She did not look like a mother caught in a lie. She looked like a queen defending her last bastion. "You have no child, Valerius," she said, her voice a low, steady frequency that cut through the crackle of the flames. "You have a kingdom. You have a throne. You have a court of executioners. Do not claim what you abandoned to the wind." "Do not dare lie to me about this," Valerius erupted, his voice dropping to a terrifying guttural register that made the glass panes of the lodge windows rattle in their wooden frames. He lunged forward, his massive hands slamming into the floorboards on either side of her hips, pinning her beneath the shadow of his broad chest. The sheer, suffocating weight of his alpha aura flooded the space, hot and heavy with the scent of electric ozone and molten gold, demanding absolute, unconditional submission. "I can smell it on you, Evadne. It is buried beneath the silver of your magic and the frost of that God's forsaken river, but it is there. The genetic signature of my own blood, a pup, my pup." He leaned down so close her breath hitched, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scent at the crook of her neck. A shudder ran through his massive frame, his muscles bunching as if he were trying to restrain the ferocious beast tearing at his insides. "A child of the Beast King and a Purifier. A child you hid from me while you worked in my kitchens like a common servant. Why?" Evadne did not flinch away from his proximity. She tilted her chin up, her gaze boring into his with a chilling, cynical amusement. "Why? Look at yourself, Valerius. Look at the monster you are when you don't get what you want. You think I would bring a fragile, sacred life into your citadel? A place where Lyra can whisper poison into your ear and convince you to execute the mother? You would have taken my baby the moment it breathed its first breath, branded it a bastard, or used its purifier blood to heal your wounded warriors until it bled dry. "I would have protected you," he roared, his eyes flaring into an incandescent blinding gold that illuminated the dark corners of the cabin. "I would have torn down the walls of the world to keep my blood safe." "You didn't even protect me from your own trackers," she countered softly, her quiet words striking his chest with the force of a physical blow. The absolute truth of her statement drained the fury from his face, leaving behind a raw, bleeding mask of agony. "You didn't know I was your mate until tonight, Valerius. If I had told you about the child a month ago, you would have assumed it belonged to a rogue. You would have killed us both to preserve your pure, royal lineage." Valerius flinched, his head dropping as a low, agonizing whine tore from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated torment from his inner wolf. He backed away from her slowly, his hands sliding off the floorboards as he rose to his full, towering height. He looked down at his own scarred, powerful hands, the very hands that had signed her death warrant just days prior. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing his lungs, turning the air in his chest to ash. She was right. He had been a king first and a man second. He had allowed the ruthless laws of survival in the northern wastes to turn him into a tyrant who trusted numbers and evidence over intuition. "Where are they?" Valerius asked, his voice suddenly dropping into a rough, raspy whisper that sounded entirely broken. He didn't use his alpha command. He was begging, his eyes searching hers with a desperate, frantic hunger. "Where is our pup, Evadne? Tell me. The winter storms are worsening. If Lyra's assassins are out in these woods, if they find the sanctuary before we do..." A cold spike of pure maternal terror pierced through Evadne's stoic defense. Her scent spiked with panic, the fragrance of winter lilies turning sharp and frantic. She had forgotten, even for a second, that the 3 rogues Valerius had slaughtered in the woods were just the vanguard. Lyra was desperate. If the former favorite realized that Evadne had survived the river, she would send every mercenary, every exiled rogue, and every dark magic practitioner in her pay to scour the borderlands. And the cloaking spell on the small cabin at the edge of the northern wastes was old. It was fading. "If you touch them," Evadne whispered, her silver eyes flaring with a sudden, dangerous light as she forced her stiff, aching body to stand. "If you bring your army or your court anywhere near that sanctuary, I will use every drop of my Purifier blood to burn your bond to ash, Valerius. I will die before I let you cage my child." Valerius looked at her, his jaw tightening as his protective, territorial instincts warred with his immense guilt. He stepped toward her, his movements slow and deliberate, showing his open, blood-stained palms to prove he meant no harm. "I am not going to cage anyone," he said, his low frequency vibrating with a solemn, unbreakable vow. "I am going to defend my family. We are going to that sanctuary together, Evadne, right now. You will guide me, and I will be the shield between our pup and the rest of this wretched world. But you must trust me enough to let me keep you warm for the journey." Before she could protest, he reached down and picked up his heavy, midnight black royal cloak from where it had dried by the hearth. He stepped into her space, his towering frame casting her in shadow, and gently draped the thick, fur-lined fabric over her shivering shoulders. The cloak smelled entirely of him, of molten gold, charred cedar, and the intoxicating heat of his skin. The moment the fabric settled on her, the mate bond surged again, a warm, golden current that flooded her veins, pushing back the final remnants of the river's icy grip. Evadne closed her eyes for a brief second, cursing the traitorous magic in her blood that wanted nothing more than to lean into his strength. She pulled the cloak tight around her chest, her steel spine holding her upright as she opened her eyes to meet his burning amber gaze. "We go now," she said coldly, turning toward the heavy oak door. "And if you betray me, Your Majesty, the river will be the kindest death you ever experience." The heavy oak door of the hunting lodge groaned as Valerius threw it open, revealing a world completely consumed by a violent, blinding blizzard. The northern wastes had awakened. The wind howled through the jagged canyon walls like a chorus of dying beasts, carrying with it a barrage of razor-sharp ice crystals that slashed against the skin. The temperature had plummeted far below freezing, turning the fresh snow into a treacherous, shifting desert of white powder. Evadne stepped out into the tempest, her small frame instantly buffeted by the gale. She staggered back a half step, but the thick, midnight black royal cloak wrapped around her shoulders caught the wind, its heavy, fur-lined weight keeping her grounded. The scent of Valerius, molten gold, charred cedar, and raw, masculine heat enveloped her, acting as a magical barrier against the worst of the sub-zero chill. Even so, the sheer kinetic force of the storm threatened to rip the breath from her lungs. Before she could lose her footing, a colossal, warm shadow materialized beside her. Valerius stepped into the path of the wind, using his massive, broad-shouldered frame as a physical shield to block the freezing gust from her. His burning amber eyes glowed through the swirling white mist like twin lanterns, fixed on her pale face with an unyielding, frantic possessiveness. "Which way?" he demanded, his low-frequency voice roaring to cut through the screeching wind. He didn't wait for her to point. His long, calloused fingers reached out, locking around her waist to anchor her against his side. "The scent lines are being obliterated by the frost. Guide me, Evadne, now!" "Northwest," she breathed, her voice carrying an absolute steady certainty despite the chaos around them. She pointed a raw, scraped hand toward a narrow, treacherous ridge that wound upward into the heart of the jagged peaks. "Past the Dead Man's Pass. The cabin is hidden in the valley of the Silver Pines. The cloaking spell is tied to my life force. It will weaken the closer I get to collapsing." Valerius's jaw tightened so hard the bone looked as if it might burst through his sun-warmed marble skin. He didn't say another word. With a sudden, synchronized movement of his entire body, he pulled her flush against his chest, his muscular thighs driving into the deep snowdrifts as he began the grueling ascent up the mountain ridge. He moved with supernatural, preternatural endurance, his breathing a steady, heavy rhythm of thick white steam that vanished into the storm. For 2 agonizing hours, they fought the mountain. The physical exertion was absolute, a brutal test of raw survival. Evadne felt her internal strength fading, her steel spine taxed to its absolute limit, as the residual hypothermia from the Glacial Serpent River clawed its way back into her muscles. Every step felt like lifting lead weights. Her suppressed wolf remained a silent, trembling ember, unable to offer any physical healing because of the ancient binding magic choking her soul. Suddenly, Valerius stopped dead in his tracks. The air around them, already freezing, grew suffocatingly dense. The distinct, foul stench of sulfur, wet matted fur, and dark, corrupted magic sliced through the clean scent of the pine and snow. It was the Shadowfang rogues. But it wasn't just a small scouting party this time. Through the shifting veil of white snow, dozens of massive, monstrous silhouettes began to materialize on the high ridges above them. Their eyes burned a sickening, demonic yellow, their jaws dripping with a viscous black saliva that hissed as it hit the frozen ground. There were at least 30 of them, a full mercenary legion hired by Lady Lyra to ensure that neither the king nor his true mate ever made it back alive. "They found the valley," Evadne whispered, a sudden sharp spike of maternal terror piercing through her stoic defense. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs as she looked toward the dip in the ridge where her hidden cabin lay. "The cloaking spell. It's flickering. They know she is there." "They will never touch her," Valerius growled, a sound so deep, so primal, it vibrated the solid granite beneath their feet. He lowered Evadne gently into a small, recessed cavern in the rock face, his large, scarred hands framing her face for a single, breathless second. The mate bond flared between them, a white-hot current of golden energy that transferred a surge of his immense, radiating vitality directly into her freezing veins. Her silver eyes locked onto his burning amber ones, seeing the absolute madness of a father and a king pushed to the edge of annihilation. "Stay here. Seal the cavern with your Purifier light if they bypass me," Valerius commanded, his voice dropping to a gravelly, unbreakable vow. "I am going to end this." He turned away from her, stepping out into the open, wind-swept plateau of the ridge. The wind caught his dark hair, plastering it against his scarred forehead. He stood alone against 30 elite assassins, his bare, muscular chest heaving as he threw his arms out wide. With an earth-shattering roar that literally triggered a minor avalanche on the distant peaks, Valerius finally let his inner beast take complete control. His body exploded outward. The bones in his spine cracked and elongated with a sickening, resonant speed. Coarse, midnight black fur erupted from his skin, his muscles expanding until he transformed into a monstrous, mythical direwolf the size of a warhorse. His eyes were pure, incandescent pools of molten gold, his fangs long and curved like ivory scimitars. He was the Beast King, the absolute apex predator of the northern realms. The rogues didn't even have time to scream. Valerius lunged into the pack like a hurricane of black fur and flashing fangs. The clearing became a masterpiece of high-definition, brutal carnage. He tore through the first line of assassins with impossible, terrifying speed, his massive paws crushing skulls against the slate rocks, his jaws snapping windpipes with effortless precision. Blood, thick, dark, and steaming, sprayed across the white snow, turning the pristine plateau into a horrific crimson canvas. Evadne watched from the cavern, her hands clutching the edges of the rock. She could feel the tremors of the battle shaking the stone beneath her boots. But as her eyes scanned the chaotic melee, she noticed a shadow separating itself from the back of the rogue pack. It was a massive, scarred rogue, carrying a dark, glowing crystal that hummed with necromantic magic, a siphon designed to break ancient cloaking spells. The beast was ignoring Valerius, slipping past the carnage and sprinting directly down the slope toward the valley where her child was hidden. "No!" Evadne screamed, her voice cutting through the roar of the wind and the sounds of tearing flesh. Valerius heard her. He spun around, his golden eyes widening in horror as he saw the rogue escaping toward his pup. But three massive mercenaries threw themselves onto his back, digging their black claws into his shoulders, pinning his massive wolf form to the ground in a desperate, suicidal effort to hold him back. The king roared in pure, unadulterated fury, thrashing violently as he tried to shake them off, but the delay was fatal. The rogue with the siphon crystal was already at the tree line of the valley. Evadne didn't think. She didn't hesitate. The maternal instinct overrode every survival mechanism, every defensive wall, and every fear she had ever harbored. She ran out of the cavern, her boots flying over the blood-stained snow as she chased after the assassin. "Stop!" she roared, her voice suddenly changing, taking on a resonant, ethereal frequency that didn't sound human. Deep within her soul, the ancient, binding chains holding her wolf captive didn't just crack, they shattered completely under the absolute pressure of her will. The forbidden bloodline of the Purifiers erupted to the surface. A blinding, cataclysmic wave of pure silver light exploded from her body, illuminating the entire mountain range like the midday sun. The sheer power of the light was so intense that the falling snow instantly vaporized into a thick, shimmering mist of silver vapor. The rogue at the tree line froze, his yellow eyes widening in terror as he turned around to face the source of the energy. Evadne stood on the edge of the slope, her dark hair flying wildly around her face. Her silver eyes were entirely luminous, burning with a celestial, holy fury. The silver light traced the intricate ancient runes of the Moonborn across her arms and chest, radiating a power so pure, so devastating, that the dark, corrupted magic of the siphon crystal in the rogue's hand instantly began to crack and dissolve into black ash. "You will not touch my daughter," Evadne whispered, her voice echoing through the minds of every living creature on that mountain like a divine judgment. With a final, desperate surge of her newly awakened power, she thrust her hands forward. A lance of pure, concentrated silver fire erupted from her palms, tearing through the air with a deafening crackle of ozone. The silver fire struck the rogue square in the chest. There was no blood, no scream. The dark, corrupted beast was instantly purified, its entire form dissolving into a cloud of harmless white ash that was swept away by the winter wind. On the plateau above, the remaining rogues fell to their knees, completely paralyzed by the sheer divine authority of the Purifier light. Valerius, having thrown off his attackers, stood in his massive wolf form, his golden eyes staring down at her with a profound, breathless awe. He had known she was a Purifier, but he had never imagined the sheer, world-altering scale of her true power. But the expenditure of such ancient magic was too much for her fragile, human-trained body. The silver light faded rapidly, the runes on her skin disappearing back beneath the surface. Evadne's knees buckled, her vision blurred into a dark, swirling void as the exhaustion finally claimed her. Her steel spine softened, and she began to fall forward into the soft snow. Before she could hit the ground, the massive, midnight black wolf was there. Valerius caught her on his broad back, his thick fur cushioning her fall. He shifted back into his human form in a split second, wrapping his powerful arms around her, pulling her close against his chest as he sprinted down the slope into the valley of the silver pines. A few hundred yards away, nestled in the grove of frozen trees, stood the small, secluded cabin. The old wooden door creaked open slightly, and through the crack, a tiny, silver-haired little girl with glowing amber eyes peeked out, whimpering softly for her mother. Valerius kicked the door open, stepping into the warmth of the small sanctuary. He placed the unconscious Evadne gently onto a wooden cot by the hearth, then turned slowly to face the child. His heart stopped as he looked into the little girl's eyes. Eyes that were an exact mirror of his own, yet filled with the pure, untamed light of her mother's lineage. The king fell to his knees before his daughter, his large, blood-stained hands trembling as he reached out toward her. The little girl hesitated for a moment, smelling the scent of molten gold and the deep, protective love radiating from him, before she took a small step forward and pressed her tiny hand against his calloused cheek. "I have you," Valerius whispered, tears finally cutting through the blood and grime on his face, as he pulled his daughter into his massive chest, his eyes fixing on his sleeping mate. "I have you both, and the world will burn before anyone tries to take you from me again."